Have you ever found yourself at a fork in the road? What do you do then? Which direction do you take? What if I were to tell you that the Bible has quite a few forks in the road, metaphorically speaking? As a matter of fact, one of those forks in the road is the topic of the following video. Find out, would you please, how that dilemma is solved. So in verse 13, Matthew chapter 1, it says, Zerubbabel was the father of Abihud. Abihud, the father of Eliakim. And Eliakim, the father of Asor. So Zerubbabel, the name Zerubbabel means seed of Babel, seed of Babel. So there's a reference in the meaning of that name that a whole new generation of the Jews, they're coming back from their exile. They're coming back from the Babylonian exile, right? So that's a good thing, won't you say? That God finally did something, kept his promise through Jeremiah, so for example, that he would bring them back home, right? So notice right here, Zerubbabel was the father of Abihud. Abihud means my father is majesty. My father is majesty. What a proper meaning of the name of the first generation that were born, so to speak, back in their homeland after their father, in this case, Zerubbabel, was brought home, so to speak, by God himself. Is it no wonder that the meaning of the name of the son of Zerubbabel, Abihud, simply is my father. My father is majesty, right? Isn't this great, Marianne?
I already have a question because I
Sure.
read this ahead of time. And when I read who Abba, Abahud was, it said son of Bela, firstborn of Benjamin.
Okay.
But it did say that the meaning was my father is majesty or father of praise.
Okay. So notice in the Bible, sometimes a name that we're searching for the meaning of the name, right, can be also more than just one person's name. So, for example, Jesus, the name of Jesus is very common. So, in our search for the meaning of the name, sometimes it depends on the resources that we use, right? Some resources uh, will cite the names that we're searching the meaning of from a different grouping of people.
Um,
But you were right on when it comes to the meaning of this name, Abihud, right? And it says right here in verse 13, Abihud is the father of Eliakim. The name Eliakim means God will establish. God will establish. So you see right now, second generation born back in the homeland is the generation that God is establishing, right? Is this making sense so far? Seed
yeah.
of Babel coming back, the son of seed of Babel. The meaning of it, Abihud, is God is my majesty. Then the second generation, the children of Abihud, is a generation, so to speak, whose name basically means God will establish, implying that is they're being established by God Himself back in their homeland. And in the conclusion of this verse 13, it says, Eliakim, the father of Asor. The name Asor simply means helper, helper. So it's a reference to God being their helper in bringing them back to their homeland, their helper in establishing them as the brand new generation born again back in their homeland. That is a testimony in and of itself of the faithfulness of Yahweh, right? That He is a covenant keeping God, that He is a promise keeping God. So, moving on to verse 14, Asor was the father of Sadok. Sadok, the name Sadok simply means righteous, righteous. Now, there is a hidden meaning right there, right? Whenever God is our helper, He's going to help us to be righteous. That's very simple, very straightforward, right? But if God is not our helper, no matter what we try on our own to be righteous, our righteousness will not be the kind of righteousness that God wants, that God desires, right? Making sense so far?
Yes.
So it says right here, Zadok, the father of Achim. Achim. The name Achim means set up, to be set up. So if you allow God to help you, He's going to birth for you a generation that will be righteous. And that generation is set up by none other than God Himself, right? And out of that generation that is set up by God, Him, He will also birth forth another generation, symbolic of this last name, Eliud. Eliud. Eliud means God is mighty. God is mighty. Again, a reference of the power of God in regeneration, in restoration, in healing, in deliverance, in salvation. You'll fill in the blank. The illusion there is the power of Yah. Eliud, God is mighty. Now, verse 15 is what we're going to focus on tonight because I don't know if you ever wonder I don't know if in time past, when you read this verse 15, that it occurs to you that verse 15 of Matthew chapter 1 is one of those forks on the road kind of verses. What it means is this verse 15 has two interpretations. Hidden in this verse 15, there are two paths that we must kind of charter through in order to understand why this is the way it is when it comes to how Matthew himself penned this down. So Eliud was the father of Eleazar. Eleazar means whom God helps, whom God helps. Eleazar, the father of Matan. Matan means gift from God, gift of God, right? And Matan, the father of Jacob. Here is where the fork on the road comes in, all right? Because if you go to Luke chapter 3, verse 23, let's go to Luke chapter 3, verse 23. I want to show and share with you why I said that this verse is one of those forks on the road kind of verses in the Bible. It is a little bit confusing if we're not doing our due diligence and vigilance in trying to figure out why there are two names given to the same individual. In this case, in verse 15 of chapter 1 of Matthew, this individual was named Jacob. But as you find in Luke chapter 3, verse 23, this same individual was named by Dr. Luke Eli, right? So if you would read somebody, Luke chapter 3, verse 23.
When he began his ministry, Jesus himself was about 30 years of age, being, as was supposed, the son of Joseph, the son of Eli.
The son of Joseph, the son of Eli, right? So notice right here, the father of Jacob. And if you go to Matthew chapter 1, verse 16, Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, by whom Jesus was born, who is called the Messiah, right? So the question, the fork on the road right here, why did this individual name differently by Matthew as Jacob and by Luke, Dr. Luke, as Heli, right? So the name Jacob means supplanter, deceiver. We know that from the narrative of Jacob that we unpacked back a while ago, right? The name Heli, it means ascending, ascending. The name Heli means ascending. So who is right? Was Matthew right? Or was Luke right? Or were they both wrong? Or were
All righty
they
then.
both right? Right? See,
I
this
thought
is the kind of good forks on the road kinds of study. So how do we reconcile, maybe that's the right word, right? The differences. How do we solve this fork on the road? So to begin with, there's a difference between how Matthew presents the genealogy of Jesus and how Dr. Luke presents the genealogy of Jesus. When it comes to Matthew, he's giving us the genealogy of Jesus from Joseph's perspective. And because of that, it is more so in Matthew chapter 1 when it comes to the genealogy of Jesus. He is basing it on the genealogy of Joseph, the earthly adopted, if you want to put it that way, father of Jesus Christ our Lord, right? Now, also in the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 1, right here, the virgin conception of Jesus is told also from Joseph's perspective.
oh.
So, yes, so the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1 is based on the genealogy of Joseph. The virgin birth of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1 is told from Joseph's perspective. And you can see it right here, starting from verse 18 of chapter 1 to verse 25. In fact, in the NASB Bible, the heading for these verses simply is Conception and Birth of Jesus. And if you read that, which we're going to unpack next Tuesday, it is very clear that the perspective of the virgin conception of Jesus, so to speak, is told by Matthew from Joseph's perspective. Also, the audience of the gospel, according to Matthew, was none other than the Jews themselves. And because of that, Matthew took a different route than Dr. Luke in order to prove to the Jews that Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is their long awaited, promised, prophesied Messiah. So far, so good.
Mm-hmm.
Now, coming to Dr. Luke, what is the difference and how did Dr. Luke present his genealogy? So, Dr. Luke presents the genealogy of Jesus based on the genealogy of Mary. Instead of Joseph, it's Mary. So, actually, it's a double blessing when you think about this, right? We have the genealogy of Jesus by Matthew based on his earthly adopted father, Joseph, by Dr. Luke based on his earthly adopted mother, Mary. So we have the best of the both perspective from a father's perspective, from a mother's perspective, right? But Dr. Luke, in his genealogy, is also telling us the virgin conception of Jesus from eyewitnesses, not from Joseph's perspective, but from eyewitnesses. And one of those eyewitnesses that gave him the necessary important information was none other than Mary, the mother of Jesus herself. So in Matthew, the virgin conception of Jesus is told from the perspective of Joseph. In Luke, the virgin conception of Jesus is told from the perspective of the eyewitnesses. And one of the eyewitnesses was none other than Jesus' own earthly adopted mother, Mary. Why is that? Because Luke wants to show his audience. By the way, the audience of Dr. Luke was not the Jews. Guess who the audience of Dr. Luke was?
Gentiles.
And why is that?
Well, he wasn't a Jew.
Yes, he was a Gentile. And because of that, he was writing with the intent of telling his Gentile audience about this Jewish Messiah, right? And because of that, he was showing Mary coming from the bloodline of David. a very famous, most beloved king of the Jews, even to the Gentiles. Because of what David had accomplished in his lifetime, David had made a name for himself that the Jews were not the only one that feared David. The Gentiles themselves did. So this helped Dr. Luke in writing the gospel of Jesus Christ according to Dr. Luke by presenting his genealogy from Mary's genealogy and his virgin conception from the witnesses, including Mary, and lastly, by showing that the earthly adopted mother of Jesus Christ, Mary, in this case, she came from the bloodline of David. David, in turn, was the only man in the whole wide world, a king at that, to whom God had made a promise to David himself, that out of your line will come one that will sit on your throne. And you find that promise of God in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 12 to 14. So what Dr. Luke was doing was he was tying a couple knots, so to speak. In the process of proving Mary to have come from the bloodline of David, Mary in turn became the mother of Jesus. Automatically, he is proving Jesus to be a descendant of David himself, which again substantiates the fact that Jesus Christ comes from a kingly, royal, ancestry line. Marianne.
How do we know that Mary was a descendant of David?
Because if you read, for example, 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 12 to 14, right? And if you read the genealogy of Jesus Christ by Dr. Luke, right? You put the two information, if you want to put it that way together, it's like putting pieces of puzzles together. Just like we go to the names in Matthew chapter 1 right here, to eventually come to the conclusion in these last two verses, 15 and 16, focusing on Joseph, the father of Jesus. If you read Mary's genealogy according to Luke, it's going to be the same thing. The focus is Mary having an ancestry line, so to speak, going back to David, right?
I thought women weren't counted.
There were not. But remember who was telling the genealogy of Jesus according to the genealogy of Mary? A Gentile by the name of Luke.
Right.
Because of that, he has a preference toward including the women, toward spotlighting the women, something that Jews would not do on their own, right?
Right.
Herein, again, is the evidence of God's sovereignty at work. God knew a long, long time ago, before he sent his son to be one of us, he knew that he was going to use both Matthew, who was a Jew, to tell the genealogy of Jesus to the Jews, proving that he is their long awaited promised prophesied Messiah, a Jew at that. And God already knew that he would be using Luke, a Gentile. And in using Luke, a Gentile, he's going to let Luke tell the genealogy of Jesus from the genealogy of Mary, a woman, a young woman at that, a virgin, right? So that the Gentiles would have the opportunity to know this Messiah, this Jewish Messiah, from a Gentile perspective.
That
So,
makes sense.
right? None of
Mhm.
us here is born a Jew. So we owe it to Dr. Luke on his take of the genealogy of Jesus from the genealogy of Mary, which help us to have a greater appreciation not only of Jesus as a friend of sinners, as a friend of Gentile sinners like you and I, but also a greater appreciation of Mary. Something, as you said, Marianne, during this culture, women were not given much weight of, so to speak. So Dr. Luke was elevating women, including Mary, in the genealogy. That is the way God works, right? Is this making sense?
Yeah.
Also, we talk about this a lot, right? And if you go back to verse 16, where it says right here, Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, by whom Jesus was born. Implied in that statement was Jesus was the son of Joseph, right? So the Hebrew word translated as son is Ben, B-E-N, B-E-N, Ben, right? So here's a good rabbit trail right here. The Hebrews, when they use the word ben, translated into English as son, it does not necessarily mean son. It has other meanings, but all these other meanings are grouped into the meaning of the word son. For example, if we talk about this, Solomon being the son of David, Solomon, the son of David, right? So in the Hebrew right there, Solomon ben Dawid. The idea is that Solomon was the first generation birthed forth from David. That's why it used the word son, ben. So that's one way the Hebrew word translated as son means. Another way the Hebrew word translated as son means is it implies in the use of the word ben, translated into English as son, a remote descendant, such as a grandson, such as a great grandson, for example, right? If you go to Matthew chapter 21, verse 9, if we go to Matthew chapter 21, verse 9, there's a very good example right here. Matthew chapter 21, verse 9. Let's go over there to help us to really understand. And what did it say?
The crowds going ahead of him and those who followed were shouting, Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest.
So, what it says right here, Hosanna to the Son of David, referring to Jesus. So, Jesus could not have been the first generation birthed forth from David. But the use of the word son, Ben, imply in this use of the word Ben, translated as son, is that Jesus is a remote descendant of David. Making sense?
Yes.
Another way the Hebrews use the word ben, son, is to imply in the use of this word ben, translated as son, that son is actually a son-in-law, a son-in-law. So if we go to First Samuel chapter 24, verse 16, First Samuel chapter 24, verse 16, it's going to become clear why the use of the word son right there means son in law. First Samuel chapter 24, verse 16. It doesn't get any more clearer than this. What did
Right.
it say?
When David had finished speaking these words to Saul, Saul said, Is this your voice, my son David? Then Saul lifted up his voice and wept.
So we know that David was not the son of Saul. But right here in the Hebrew, Saul is asking David, right? Is this not your voice, my son David? So we know this word son right here means son-in-law because David was married to Saul's daughter, right?
Mhm.
Now, the other way that this Hebrew word translated as son, ben, is used is in regards to the levirate marriage law, right? So what is the levirate marriage law?
I don't know.
Okay, so let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 25, Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 5 to 10, verse 5 to 10. Deuteronomy 25, verse 5 to 10. Anybody?
When the brothers live together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the deceased shall not be married outside the family to a strange man. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her to himself as a wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And it shall be that the firstborn whom she bears shall assume the name of this dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out from Israel. But if the man does not desire to take his brother's wife, then his brother's wife shall go up to the gate to the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to establish a name for his brother in Israel. He is not willing to perform the duty of a husband's brother to me. And the elders of the city shall summon him and speak to him. And if he persists and says, I do not desire to take her, when his brother's wife shall come to him in the sight of the elders and pull his sandals off his foot and spit in his face, she shall declare, thus is done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. Keep going.
Yeah, last one, verse 10, please.
And in Israel his name shall be called the house of him whose sandal is removed.
That's the levirate marriage law, which guarantees the surviving wife to always have a son who will carry her deceased husband's last name. Is this making sense so far? Right? Now, the use of this Hebrew word ben, translated as son, is also used to imply a stepson taking the legal status of his stepfather. A stepson taking the legal status of his stepfather. We don't have to look too far back to Matthew. If we go to Matthew chapter 13, verse 55. Matthew chapter 13, verse 55.
Is it not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary, and his brothers James and Joseph and Simon and Judas?
There you go. Right? So alluded in that verse is the fact that Jesus was, so to speak, a stepson to his father Joseph when it comes to his other brothers. Did you notice that?
Mm-hmm.
There were names of Jesus's brothers mentioned there. Right? Is not this referring to Jesus, the carpenter's son, the carpenter being Joseph? Is not his mother called Mary? We established that. We know that. And his brothers. Whose brothers? Jesus's brothers. James and Joseph and Simon and Judas. So according to this verse by Matthew himself, Jesus has 4 half brothers. James, Joseph, Simon, Judas. Because he has 4 half brothers, they make Jesus a half brother to these 4 other brothers of his, right? So Jesus, in this case, is a stepson to Joseph in light of these half brothers, taking the legal status of his stepfather, Joseph. You see, one word, son, in the English Bible, it does not tell us anything. But in the Hebrew, ben, B-E-N, as I just explained, share, and show you, it can mean many different things. A son, natural son, stepson, a stepson taking the legal status, right? Levirate marriage laws, son, a son that is birthed forth because of the existing levirate marriage law. Is this not good?
So, like a puzzle.
It is. This is why I said this verse 15 of Matthew chapter 1 is one of those 4 on the road verses. Which way do we go? Do we take Matthew's account or do we take Luke's account? We take both's account because they both lead back to Jesus. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, does the Bible have controversial verses? You bet it does. But just because it does, it doesn't mean that the Bible is not inspired by God. It is our duty, it is our responsibility to search for the answer when it comes to a fork on the road first, like this one. Making sense? So the name Joseph, the name of the earthly, natural, well, not natural, kind of adopted father of Jesus, it means Yah will add. Joseph means Yah will add. Yah will increase. So back to this verse 16, Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary. Notice the emphasis of Joseph. His name is listed first, and then the qualification, the husband of Mary. You see the exact opposite in Luke's account. See, a little observation like that, right, adds to our understanding. By whom Jesus was born. Notice it didn't say the mother of Jesus. Did you catch that?
I did now.
Did you catch that, folks? Joseph, the husband of Mary, by whom Jesus was born. It did not say the mother of Mary, the mother of Jesus. The question we need to ask ourselves is why? Why did not Matthew just pen it down after he penned down the name Mary right there, the mother of Jesus? See? Remember, I always say when it comes to studying the Bible, we need to ask these 6 questions: who, what, when, where, why, how. Who write it? What is written? When it is written? Where it is written? Why it is written? How it is written. In this case, why is it written this way? By whom Jesus was born. That's a $1 million question, isn't it?
Sure is.
Why did he have to go to these rabbit trails, right? Cutting to the chase, so to say. Why didn't he just write that in the mother of Jesus?
Because it was an immaculate conception.
Yes, because Jesus was not born from the womb of Mary naturally. Notice the qualification following that statement. Who is called the Messiah? Now, we have to add to this first the life's experiences of Matthew himself when it comes to him being a disciple of Jesus Christ. We know that he was a tax collector. We know he also goes by the name of Levi. We know that tax collectors were hated during this time by both the Jews and the Gentiles. The Jews look at a Jewish tax collector like Matthew as a betrayer because they work for the Romans to collect taxes from their own people, the Jews, and give it to the Romans. You follow what I'm saying? The Romans look at a Jewish collector simply as a tool. Therefore, they are not also being regarded highly by the Romans. Right? But notice right here, in the 3.5 years he spent with Jesus, he noticed, and we know this from the Gospels, according to Matthew, according to Mark, according to Luke, according to John, that Jesus' own Jewish people rejected him. That Jesus' own Jewish people refused to believe, to recognize, to embrace him as their Messiah. Therefore, he put it down right here. by whom Jesus was born, an allusion to his virgin conception, who is called the Messiah, to emphasize who Jesus really is beyond the fact that he was a carpenter, that he was a Jew, that he was born of Jewish parents, so to speak. Making sense?
Mhm.
Right? So, any other questions so far about these two verses, 15 and 16? We had a good rabbit trail there. Now, 17. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. From David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations. And for the deportation to Babylon to the Messiah, 14 generations. 14 plus 14 plus 14 is 42, right? Now, the key to understanding this are some of the important words right here. Abraham, the father of the Jews. David, the only king that ever united them as a people. David was considered by the Jews themselves to be more of a Messiah than Jesus because of David's ability to unite them as a people. Jesus, on the other hand, because he died on a cross, the Jews were told and taught since they were born, put it that way, that when you see a man hung on a cross, that man is cursed by God. So they refuse to embrace Jesus as their Messiah based on that theology. On the other hand, David, having accomplished no other king could accomplish, right? He united the Jews as a people. King Saul didn't do that. The judges in the book of the Old Testament didn't do that. For that reason, the Jews had a high regard for David. In fact, to this day, if you happen to have a Jewish neighbor, and if you should engage yourself in a conversation with a Jewish neighbor about the Messiah, he's going to tell you to your face that they believe in a royal Messiah, in a kingly Messiah, not a suffering Messiah like Jesus. And they're still expecting that royal, kingly Messiah.
Even though they read the prophets,
Yeah,
and the prophets foretold
yeah,
a whole different story.
yeah. This is why also in the prior verse, Matthew, who himself was a Jew, having spent 3.5 years with Jesus, a Jew, having witnessed with his own eyes how Jesus was on Jewish people, rejected him, he penned it down right here, who is called the Messiah, Mashiach, as if to dump it to the face of his Jewish audience. Okay, so you rejected him. I'm going to tell you exactly who he is, the way that I myself have experienced as a Jew. I think that's very powerful testimony,
Mhm.
right? So Abraham, the father of faith, David, a royal kingly Messiah to the Jews, right? 14 is 7 times 2. 7 is a number symbolic of wholesomeness, completion, totality. There are 7 days in a week, right?
Mhm.
Now, 2 in the Bible is very important. 2, by the witnesses of 2 or 3, a matter is established. That's the word of God. That's God's own word. So when it says I have 14 generation equals 7 generation times 2, imply in this 14 is 2 witnesses, double witnesses. One group of 7 generation, another group of 7 generation, 2 witnesses of 2 groups of 7 generation of the genealogy of Jesus Christ. This is very important because it says 3 times right here in this verse. 14 generation from Abraham to David, 14 generation from David to deportation to Babylon, and then another 14 generation from deportation to Babylon from Messiah, right? So if you just take the number 14 and replace it with 7 times 2, we have 3 sevens and 3 twos. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
You add 3 and 3 is 6. 6 is a number symbolic of humanity because Adam was created on the 6th day. What do you think God is trying to tell us right here? 14 generation, 14 generation, 14 generation, 7 times 2, 7 times 2, 7 times 2, 2 sets of 3. 3 plus 3 is 6. 6 is a number symbolic of the creation of humanity. By the time this 42 generation came and gone, humanity would have been delivered by its own Messiah, Jesus Christ. What God created Adam on the 6th day. Did you remember in Genesis, after he created Adam and Eve, God says something that's very different than the other days. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. After he created, he said, it is
Complete.
good,
Oh, good.
good. But after he created Adam and Eve, he said, it is very good. But notice, coming to chapter 2 of Genesis, Adam and Eve blew it big time. Because of that, God said, if you read the narrative of the fall, right, we know it to be the fall, when after they sin against God, right, 2 questions were asked by God to Adam and Eve. The question he asked to the man, Adam, simply is this: where are you, Adam? It's not that God didn't know where he was. God sees everything. God saw where Adam was. That question was designed to provoke confession on Adam's part. To the woman, Eve, God asked the question, what is it? What is this that you have done to me? Now, those questions are symbolic of when we sin against God and we try to hide like they did, or try to deny a sin, God is going to confront us with questions. Where are you? What is it, Eve, that you have done to me? Did you not realize the consequence of what you just did to me? I intend for the two of you to live eternally, to not die physically. But because you disobey me, now I have no other choice but to let you die physically. That's implied in that question. What is this, Eve, that you have done to me? And notice that question was addressed to Eve, not to Adam. Did you know why? Because he took the fruit and gave it to Adam.
Didn't Adam blame Eve?
He did, which is a no-no, which is a no-no. Right? I mean, we can go on a rabbit trail on that narrative alone when it comes to relationship between a man and his wife. Or for that matter, any man in a relationship with a woman, they can learn a lot from that narrative. Number one, stop blaming the other.
That's for sure.
That's for sure, right? Now, how many marriages would have been saved if both the husband and wife would just apply that principle and that truth? Stop pointing your finger at the other party. Point it back first to you. What did you contribute to the mess? Right? Secondly, don't hide from your mess. Own up to your mess. Right? And thirdly, for the man, I can speak of myself, right? Notice in that narrative, after Adam and Eve sinned against God, they both climbed up to the tree and hid themselves in the tree. Don't hide yourself from God. He's going to find you sooner or later. Right? So the next name in this chapter, verse 17, is Babylon. Babylon, right? The name Babylon comes from the phrase, the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel that Nimrod built. The name Babel means confusion, confusion, right? So notice how the story goes. When Nimrod built the Tower of Babel, Josephus, the historian, the Jewish historian named Josephus, he wrote the reason Nimrod built the Tower of Babel was Nimrod was thinking to himself, if I could just build a tower that could reach as high as it could to the sky, I could get myself closer to this God to take revenge from this God for having killed my ancestors in the flood. That goes to say how futile our thinking process is. That a man could think and believe that he could build a tower as high as he could, as close as he could in building it to reach the sky, thinking and believing he could just climb up this tower to God and take revenge on God. By the way, the actual interpretation of the word Babel as a tower is not just a tower like the Leaning Pisa, the Tower of Pisa in Italy, right? This is actually a shrine, a circular thing, a shrine after shrine after shrine that is built in a circular pattern that goes higher and higher and higher. The right word for it is ziggurat. Ziggurat. That's spelled Z as in zebra, Ziggurat, Ziggurat. You can Google it up, and there are some pictures about this ziggurat shrine, one shrine built next to it, and it goes in an encircling form all the way to the top. And in the process of Nimrod going from one so to speak, floor to another floor, one layer of shrine to another shrine, he was offering his sacrifices to the gods that he believed, to the gods that he worshiped. This is just to show you the futility of our thinking process as humans, right? So the other name right here is Messiah. Messiah. So the English word Messiah, Christ, it simply means anointed. Anointed. So the difference between this Jesus born during this time as a carpenter and the other Jesuses that were around, because the name of Jesus was very popular, is the fact that this Jesus alone is anointed by God. And how do we know? And how did they know that this Jesus was a different Jesus, that this Jesus was anointed by God compared to the other Jesuses? It will be modern day Spanish version of Jesus, right? Some of us have worked with some coworkers or neighbors with Spanish speaking background, right? Their names are Jesus. So Jesus is like the Spanish version of Jesus. So the difference between this Jesus the carpenter, the son of Mary and Joseph, compared to the other Jesuses, because of that, Matthew called him right here twice, by the way. He mentioned the phrase, the Messiah, back to back, verse 16, verse 17, because Jesus alone could perform all those miracles. There were the authenticating signs of a Messiah, causing a blind to see, causing a lame to walk, raising the dead. These are the authenticating signs that you are an anointed one from God. See, we read this phrase, the Messiah, a lot, but we just don't put much thought into it. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a powerful revelation. Jesus is not just an ordinary carpenter. Jesus is not just an ordinary Jewish man. He's not just an ordinary rabbi. He's not just an ordinary healer, right? And the program, The Chosen, right? The Chosen is portraying Jesus to a degree that he becomes relatable to you and I. Because the idea of this program, The Chosen, is to spotlight his humanity, to make him more relatable to you and I, which is good to some degree, right? But we have to remind ourselves, Jesus is fully God and fully man. When we emphasize one over the other, we're going to have a twisted theology of Jesus. Case in point, Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't consider the divinity of Jesus. They emphasize the humanity of Jesus. In their own Bible, it says, Jesus, a Son of God, not the Son of God. For that reason, they don't see Jesus as divine. They only see Jesus as a prophet. Yeah. It's called heresy.
That's for sure.
That's exactly what it is, a heresy. On the other hand, we also have Christian sects and denomination that emphasize the divinity of Jesus at the expense of his humanity. And because of that, he is not relatable. Because of that, he's so far out there. There is no connection. There is no personal relationship because of the emphasis on his divinity. These two have to be balanced. Yeah. There is a book written by one of the early church fathers. It's written in Latin. The title of it is Curdeus Homo, Curdeus Homo, Curdeus Homo. The thesis of the book simply is this. It answers the question why Jesus has to be fully God and fully man. An excellent book if you are into reading. You can Google it out. There's a PDF format of it available on the internet, right? Put it that way. So the good news about the forks in the roads that are in the Bible simply is this. They all lead back to Jesus. It is my prayer that the preceding video has also been a fork in the road that leads you back to Jesus. I hope this video has been a blessing to you. And if it has, would you consider subscribing to the channel and helping promote the channel so that more and more will come to realize and to see that there is indeed more to the Bible beyond the literal. Thank you, and see you in the next episode. God bless.